So I just watched Judge Napolitano from New York and Matthew Ho of North Carolina, I guess late of the State Department, I guess it was, or Pentagon. Um, yeah, hi, Judge Napolitano. Unfortunately, I grew up in New York State in Tarrytown, New York. I was a leader in the Boy Scout troop there for 6 years, or not all 6 years, but whatever. Excuse me. Father worked for New York City Planning Department for a number of years, 15, I believe. Uh, and both you and Matthew Ho were kind of, ruminating on what the hell, the U.S. empire is dying, and what next. And yeah, I just wanted to chime in, living here now in former, Leningrad, former Soviet Union. I've been, for lack of other things to do, it's capitalist here now, unfortunately. People here forgot, why the revolution was carried out at such great sacrifice. So they, the fucking idiots among them went for Coca-Cola, blue jeans, and McDonald's, and it blew up in their faces. Um, and the bandits among them basically stole and murdered for 9 years. But the country managed to pull itself out of the gutter for the most part. So now, yeah, it's as I tell various and sundry here, it's 5 times less shitty than Turtle Island, occupied by Auschwitz guards back, the land of freedom. And they can't believe me. Even, I was sitting in Udelny Park, the neighborhood from Lenin fled during the July days to avoid being murdered by the bourgeois scum here back in 1917. Went to actually just across the border, 30 minutes north from where I am, to Finland, which is also a topic of conversation that you brought up. And I was sitting there, and I happened, or this alleged IT analyst happened to sit next to me on the bench after the police, were circulating in the park in the squad roll, and dancing babushki and a few dedushki down in the you know asphalt area, maybe 200 feet from myself, and I forget his name. Generally, as a communist, I don't memorize people's names, but and then yeah, so we're all sitting around on the bench, former Soviet citizens and I, and this I offer this random bro about my age, maybe a little younger. I don't know, however old he is. Well, maybe he was 55. I'm 55. I offer him some cherries, and he declines, and I'm like, wow, are you really Russian? I mean, every Russian loves cherries, but anyway. So, I'm sipping my water, eating my cherries, and we get to talking, and, about the old days, or what were we talking about exactly? Oh yeah, like, what do I think of Russia? And I'm like, well, it's like a giant episode of Seinfeld. And he's like, Seinfeld? And I'm like, yeah, man, you don't like cherries and you don't know Seinfeld. None of you Russians know Seinfeld. So, I show him the episode with the soup Nazi. I'm sure you're familiar with it. And yeah, it was amusing. I was like, yeah, they're basically Russian Jews, except for Jerry. I guess he's half Syrian. But, they're all Russian Jews. It's like an episode from some Russian, comedy sketch. And I'm like, yeah, Russia's a giant episode of Seinfeld, So, and, talk about the last 30 years. And, I say, yeah, it's like that movie Basic Instinct with Sharon Stone. And he was like, yeah, oh, yeah, sexy babe, crossing your legs, uncrossing your legs. And I'm like, yeah, that was a metaphor for capitalism. It's a beautiful woman, but she's a psychopath, maybe. And so, who gets away with murder? And the stupid here fell for that 30 years ago, but yeah, and as Brecht said, Bertolt Brecht, the great German communist poet, one of the fathers of the modern German language, ironically, I guess, being here in the former Soviet Union, that in the contradiction lies the hope. So, and with that, he thanked me, for the conversation and bid me adieu. And at any rate, I've been reading this book. What was it? Do I have the? Oh, yes, I have it here. Actually, my library slip from the Russian National Library. Krasnoy terror и деятельность Вичекви. What is it? 1918 год. The Red Terror and the activities of the Committee of Public Safety in 1918. And, my Russian isn't that great yet, but, I've been using Google Translate, Yandex Translate, and yeah, it works really well. And so, I've been reading this, great book, or very interesting book. One of the only and best sources, I guess, on, what happened here, 100 plus years ago. And, one quote that stuck out was Zinoviev. He was Lenin's, buddy, comrade here. They escaped together in July 1917 July. From here, from Kerensky murdering them, the friend of America. He ended up at Columbia like Brzezinski or, Obama, I think. Wasn't, no, I don't know if Obama was there, but he was certainly a protege. And my father was in Columbia. Anyway, that's another longer story, but related. And at any rate, so Zinoviev, he became they nicknamed him the Emperor of Leningrad. And in 1918, you had certain labor aristocrats, railway workers, pattern makers, and others. Like in the U.S., you have like a whole layer of the population, whatever it is, 20%, let's say, it's bought off. It raises its hand, it cheers on U.S. imperialism, it votes for Biden, right? Half the voting public. Well, Zinoviev spoke of those traitors, like that here 100 years ago, who followed the Menshevik Party, their former comrades from 1900, let's say. And, the Mensheviks were for worker democracy. They were to the left of Bernie Sanders. My grandparents followed the Mensheviks. They were merchants. My grandfather was a millionaire at one point in the 20s, basically, in New York. In the garment trade, he was a factor. But the rest of the family was communist, Bolshevik. So, because they were workers. And Grigory Zinoviev, said, basically, you translated it, it gets to, let's see, I wrote it down here, I think, if we will try to persuade those elements of the population who should be allied with us, the workers and the peasants, that, they should not travel down that road. They should, be faithful and to the revolution and progress and dignity. But if they choose to ally themselves with bandits, that is, in the end, these red bourgeois, these red merchants, pink merchants, whatever, if they choose, like Bernie Sanders, votes for military funding, right? When he was, I guess, whatever he was, congressman, senator, whatever. I didn't really pay close attention. Senator, was he? From Vermont, and, voting for, as Alexander Coburn pointed out in, many columns, that he was basically shilling for the defense industry from his home state. But, so he's to the right of these Mensheviks. Yeah. And, you draw your own conclusions about the squad, or, the 20% or half of America that actively allies itself with that, or to the right of that. But so Zinoviev concluded, he said, well, if we can't persuade you to stop allying yourselves with bandits, as Matthew Ho describes, the defense fraud and all the murder and the theft, the grand theft around the world, then it's no longer a war to feed, creatures like you. It's a war to the death. And so, that's what we're in. And, as my IT buddy Fezbe agent said, do you think we'll ever be able to go back to the 80s? And, on reflection, I was like, well, I certainly hope not. Because at that point the Soviet Union was declining, the religious nutbags were rising, all sorts of, horrible, dark, obscurantist elements were taking over the world, only to, climax and frenzy and orgy of, death and degeneration in 1991, which, the scum of the West called freedom. So, this is the natural result of, the capitalist system is, death, decay, and all these contradictions coming home. And, as Brecht said, in the contradiction lies the hope. So, as Malcolm X said, your nightmare is my dream. So, and thanks, Matthew, that was interesting, about your observations about Finland. That kind of focused, the reality of, here I am in Leningrad, and, 1/3 of the city was murdered, with the collaboration of those fucking, Finnish bourgeois. And now, overwhelmingly, the filth there, the Mensheviks, the Junker, grandchildren, the grandchildren and landlords who murdered the best of Finland 100 years ago, in their revolution, counter-revolution. 1941, Finland helped Nazi Germany lay siege to this city, and, little children starved to death and were not able to be saved, even when the Soviets rescued them. They were so far gone physically. I think there was a little girl, Tatiana Sadichev. Her whole family was murdered, by the blockade, starved to death. And then in the end, Tatiana, she was so weakened, she died after recording the deaths of her whole family and being liberated. So, that's the sort of context here that people here, including myself, live with. And my family was even worse, because they weren't here in Leningrad. They were there in Yeshua's, liberated Soviet Western Belarus, the most awful place you could have been in World War II. That's where, the Gestapo made their headquarters regionally. And, the whole town, October 31st, 1941, was wiped out by, who the West sent. So for me, again, that was the nightmare. My Menshevik grandmother, her whole family was murdered. And, same for my father, her son, whole family, by 1940, 45. yeah, 48. My cousin in Moscow, who married a Red Army officer, who was probably KGB. 1948, she sends a photograph to my grandmother in New York saying, they are all dead in the family. I'm the only survivor. But my grandmother could never tell anyone else in the family in New York that because of the fucking filth in America that ruled America, that hated the Soviet Union, that hated Jews, that hated Reds. So imagine living with that until you died and never telling anyone. And, then I tracked that family down, 36 years after my grandmother died in 1983, 84. And, if, for me, even if it gets down to tactical nukes, you ally yourself with bandits, Lenin gave you a choice 100 years ago. You either fucking turn the guns around and shoot your officers in your own ruling class, or you go up in a ball of fucking fire, as a paper, as a little puppet soldier, for, basically crooks. Look at the filth that, infest the U.S. Congress and the White House. I mean, you want to die for that filth? Anyhow, so, and yeah, like here, Russia, it's degenerated, from the degeneration of, the Stalinist period. There's more corruption here, but, still, there are healthier elements, in this country, thanks to the revolution. And, thanks to the Soviet period, 70 plus 80 years, where we overcame the capitalist system. And, you had layer upon layer of people who were honest and cultured and civilized, dedicated to building a better world here and aiding the colonial world, which is why, 80-90% of the rest of the world is on our side here. So, think about that. Today is July 3rd, which is the day of Belaruski Soviet liberation, from the Nazis. That's when the Red Army entered Minsk and, had driven out the Wehrmacht. And, the survivors, said, we're still alive, I mean, what portion of Minsk was murdered? It was like half Jewish there, and probably at least a quarter of the Jews, probably more, the ones that didn't flee or weren't evacuated, were probably murdered by, the Nazis. Again, the Friends of the West. I mean, I've seen photos now from friends on Facebook, like the Nederlander SS volunteers lining up to march off to the east. But, today's our Liberation Day in Belarus. But my family, their Liberation Day was actually September 18th, or September 17th, actually. Because they were in the western part of Belarus occupied by the Polish imperialists, who also want to go to war, with Belarus, Russia, the former Soviet Union. They hated, so many Poles. They killed more Jews, as Jan Gross pointed out. They murdered more Jews than they killed occupying German Wehrmacht, because they were just the side of, fascism. And bourgeois Jews were like that too. We had a friend of the family. He said for his family, the only thing Hitler did wrong was go after the Jews, but they were bourgeois Jews with money. And, that's where you get Zelensky or Nuland or, all those other fucking freaks. So, and to an extent, my father, he hated the Soviet Union. He was a fucking idiot in the end. So, and a collaborator. So, but I'm not. And, in my family there in Soviet Belarus, June 21st, 22nd here, I guess it is, 1941, the Friends of the West came, Blitzkrieg, came in and occupied, our town Yeshwiz and Snov, and wiped out, all of my family there. And October 30th, basically 31st, 1941, they're all shot into pits. And so, but, today, even today, the better Jews who were evacuated as workers, as communist cadre, they survive today in Belarus. And, there's the peasant descendants, either Belaruski, Polish, what have you, Tatar. They survive today in Belarus, and I think most of them remember, what the West did, and of course the West is, reinforcing, and my God, how many bases now are being opened up in Finland? Like, what is it, 20 miles away from the former Soviet border here, and we've got mechanized divisions on our side against these traitors and reptiles. So, yeah, I mean, if you think you can, in Washington, in the U.S., and those who lick their boots think that you can defeat, a nation which is probably like 5 times more honest. They say an army is a reflection of the society it comes from, right? Like, that's kind of a saying from the Vietnam period and before. And, Russia is degenerated compared with 100 years ago, but because of the revolution here, cost of living, the experience of people in the day-to-day, I would say just, in the metric of cost of living, it's 5 times cheaper to live here, even when you adjust for purchasing power parity. An equivalent city, Los Angeles, it'll cost me $5,000 a month to live there. Here in former Leningrad, it costs me $1,000 or less to live here. So, that's just one metric that tells you. Yeah, so it's actually 2.5 times. But still, the people you meet, the level of honesty and decency, the 20% in the U.S. that needs to be shot or deported or gulagged, what is it here? Maybe, 5% trash here. No, 10%. They vote liberal. Let's say it's 10%. Yeah, so, we have half the trash you do. And we have the benefit of an actual, the greatest revolution in history from 100 years ago here. And, the trash here is trying to bury that, but the effect still, remains. What did Yevgeny Yevtushenko say? Under duress from the Soviet bureaucracy, probably, but the guns of the Aurora resound echo. That was a signal of the revolution here. The battle cruiser Aurora. Those the echo of that gunshot still resounds here, and still makes this a better place to be. 2.5 times better, I would say. If you want to put a number on it, better here. So, yeah. So basically, what then? Yeah. So, I guess we'll see. But the former Soviet Union and the rest of the world, basically, we're done, and you're done, and the next move is yours, and fuck around and find out.